Let's start the session. So today we have Dr. Siddharth Sawat, who is a MD Medicine, and as we discuss all, will move on to a topic that is stroke. So let's begin. Sir, continue.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic that is stroke. Myself, Dr. Siddharth. So why is stroke important? Because every other case that we see in casualty is stroke. Either it may be hemorrhagic or ischemic, but it's stroke. So that's so important that we have to know the management to save the patient mortality as well as morbidity. So let's learn what is stroke first. Stroke is defined by WHO as a clinical syndrome consisting of rapidly developing clinical signs of focal, at times global, disturbance of cerebral function lasting more than 24 hours. Note this is very important point, which is lasting for more than 24 hours or leading to death with no apparent cause other than vascular origin. There is one more terminology known as transient ischemic attack. TIA, it's temporary focal neurological deficit of sudden onset caused by ischemia of the brain or retina, which is less than 24 hours, followed by complete recovery. But there has been some changes in this definition, whereas the newer definition tells there should be no objective evidence of acute infarction in the affected region of brain or retina for less than 1 hour. This is very important. Previously, it has been told as it is more than up to 24 hours, but now it is less than 1 hour. And where CT or MRI is very necessary here because there will be no signs of infarct in this case. Some facts regarding stroke. As we know, it's a leading cause of adult disability. Up to 80% of all strokes are preventable through the risk factor management. And on an average, someone suffers a stroke every 40 seconds in United States. Then what are the risk factors that leads to stroke? They can be classified in two ways. Things you cannot change and things that you can change. So the risk factors which we cannot change are age. As we know, increasing age is directly proportional to the risk of stroke. And race, African and Latin Americans are more prone to stroke. Whereas gender, male gender is more prone to stroke up to age of 60 to 70 years. But later on, it becomes equal for both male and female, which shows some protective role of estrogen in development of thrombus. And then family history, whereas family history of TIA or stroke has got indirectly or directly increased risk of or precipitation of the stroke. And past history of stroke can also be a risk factor for repeated strokes. Things that we can change. Hypertension, we can treat it, we can control the hypertension, which can in turn reduce the chances of stroke. Diabetes, hyperglycemia directly indicates the severity of the stroke. And high cholesterol level, which can also be controlled by statins. And smoking, including secondhand smokers, both are at increased risk of stroke. And physical inactivity and overweight. So before going to topic proper, let us change some perception which we commonly have. So the myths regarding stroke is that it is not preventable. But the truth is that up to 80% of the strokes are preventable by preventing the risk factors. And the other myth is that it cannot be treated. No, that's wrong. No. Previously, what we used to know is stroke is equivalent to giving aspirin and clopidogrel, but now it's not like that. Stroke can be treated by doing thrombolysis at an early hour, which if the patient comes within 4.5 hours. But yeah, it requires emergency treatment. And it only occurs in elderly, which is again wrong. Stroke can occur at any age. Even childhood strokes are seen when there are hemorrhagic tendencies, or strokes can be seen in adulthood, like in cerebral venous thrombosis in case of postpartum. And the other one is recovery ends after 6 months. No, stroke recovery can last up to a lifetime. Neuronal generation or synaptic generations can occur up to a lifetime. And classification of stroke. Broadly, stroke can be classified based on arterial stroke or venous stroke. Whereas venous stroke is not that important because it occurs in less than 1% of total stroke. And most common venous stroke being cerebral venous thrombosis, which is entirely a different topic. And coming to arterial stroke proper, it can be occurred by two ways. One by infarction, second by hemorrhage. Now this infarction can be because of again two things. One can be because of embolus or because of thrombosis. Hemorrhagic stroke is more of surgical. surgical topic where it can be because of brain parenchyma or because of subarachnoid hemorrhage. So in total, what we are going to deal here is more of about ischemic stroke, where it can be because of thrombus or can be because of embolus. Embolic stroke, as we know, it can be because of arterial embolus, that is arterial stroke, embolus, or it can be because of cardioembolic stroke, which occurs in case of atrial fibrillations. And thrombotic stroke, it is same as it occurs in heart, where we call it as myocardial infarction because of occlusion of the coronary vessels, whereas we call it as cerebral CVS in case of brain, where it occurs because of thrombus in the cerebral vessels. So broadly, this stroke, as I told, ischemic and hemorrhagic. In ischemic, there is clot which is present in the vessels, which is leading to reduced blood supply to the area of the brain, which is supplied by that artery. And the bleeding is because of rupture of the arteries, where there is bleeding occurring and the focus is being occluded and tamponated by the blood that accumulates there. Now let's know the pathogenesis, how this stroke occurs. Before knowing this, what we should know is what is the normal cerebral blood flow. As we know, normal cerebral blood flow is around 25, or some books even mention 50 to 100 ml per 100 gram per minute. So now if this cerebral blood flow reduces, might be because of two factors. As we know, cerebral blood flow is equal to cerebrovascular resistance divided by mean arterial pressure. In normal individual, this cerebrovascular resistance and mean arterial pressure go hand in hand and helps in maintaining the cerebral autoregulation. But in case of stroke, this autoregulation is deranged, which leads to reduced cerebral perfusion. So if cerebral perfusion reduces less than 25 ml per 100 gram per minute, that leads to ischemia, but not infarction. It is ischemia. But if this blood flow reduces less than 10 ml per 100 gram per minute, this is called as then infarction. So the range between 10 to 25 is the thing that we are studying this topic. That is the part that can be salvaged, that can be revived. So again, same thing which has been shown in this slide, where we can see from 100, when there is drastic reduce in the cerebral blood flow to around 10 or less than 10, the events that occur are at the level of 50 ml, where there is inhibition of the protein synthesis which starts beginning. But it is at 25 where there is shifting of the glycolytic pathway from aerobic to anaerobic. And as we know, whenever there is shift of the Krebs cycle from aerobic to anaerobic, there is accumulation of the products which leads to acidosis like ketones. So this product which leads to tissue acidosis and change in the microenvironment of the cerebral cells leads to neuronal electrical failure, where there is reduced evoked potential. So once there is neuronal electrical failure, there is inhibition of sodium and potassium ATPase pump, leading to membrane failure. And this in turn leads to cell death. So as they say, the eye is always caught by light, but the shadow has more to say. And this holds good even in our topic. Let's know why. As I told, the cerebral blood flow between 10 to 25 ml per 100 gram per minute of tissue is the range where tissue can be salvaged, where it can be revived back. So that region is called as penumbra. So let's know what is this penumbra. We usually see in lunar eclipse where there is complete darkness, and that darkness is called as umbra. But there is a rim of light around this darkness, which is called as penumbra. So there is always a ray of hope, and this ray of hope in case of stroke is the region of penumbra, which can be salvaged if early thrombolysis is done. And in this diagram, as it's been shown, there is central ischemic core surrounded by a region of penumbra. So this is the part which is important for us, which we can be revived back. Next, what are the clinical manifestations? Broadly speaking, there can be numerous clinical manifestations, as the brain is that controls the whole body. So each part affected gives different manifestations. But the major manifestations can be remembered by this mnemonic called as B fast, where B indicates balance, and balance is controlled by cerebellum. So usually vertigo, dizziness, and impairment in the balance is seen in case of posterior circulation stroke, where there's involvement of cerebellum. Next is eyes. Nystagmus can be present. Up gaze or low gaze palsy can be present, which can be seen in case of Nathaniel or Parinot syndromes, which are midbrain and pontine syndromes. Face, where you can see facial palsies, that is UMN type of facial palsies, when there is involvement of corticobulbar fibers of seventh nerve. Or arms and legs, which are normally seen, and normally the patient comes to us because of this, where there's hemiparesis, complete weakness or partial weakness of the one sided arm or legs. Speech can be affected in two ways. One, unable to speak, that is motor aphasia, which is because of Broca's area involvement, or it can be because of unable to understand the other speech, that is loss of comprehension, which is seen in case of Wernicke's aphasia. Or there can be loss of repetitions, which are because of loss of the cortical fibers. And then time is of paramount importance. If the patient comes to us within 4.5 hours, the region of penumbra can be saved by early interventions. But once the neurons are damaged, they can't be revived back. So time is of paramount important in this case. And is it always stroke if the patient comes with the symptoms that we have described earlier? No, it's not always stroke. There is something called a stroke mimicus. This stroke mimicus can be remembered by a mnemonic called BEHIND, where B stands for brain, that can be mass can be present or contusions can be present. Or it can be because of epilepsy, where we see in case of thoughts palsy, in case of post-ictal state, or in case of hyponatremia or hypoglycemia. Intoxications and infections like meningitis or encephalitis can mimic stroke. Neuronal abnormalities like hemiplegic migraine, it's a type of migraine, rare type of migraine though, but still it mimics stroke. Multiple sclerosis, as we know, this is a neurodegenerative disease which mimics every other disease in neurology. And then it can be dissection, or it can be because of cervical disc prolapse classically. So these all things, there are many other things which can mimic stroke, but these are the important things to be remembered. So these are called as stroke mimickers. Always try to rule out these things before we come to a conclusion of stroke. So starting with management of stroke, before going to management proper, a clinician should answer the following question. Is it really a stroke? Because we have studied there is something called stroke mimickers. So is it really a stroke? First know that. Then if it is a stroke, what type of stroke it is? Whether it is ischemic stroke or hemorrhagic stroke, or it is even a venous stroke, where it can be cerebral venous thrombus, which is commonly seen in our casualties. And why did it happen? Is there any hemorrhagic tendency in the patient, or is he a senile age group where the atherosclerosis is very common, or the smoking being the risk factor, or is it postpartum, which is risk where there is hypercoagulable state? And how does it affect the patient? This is the question, which is $1,000,000 question. This is because the patient comes to you when there is some problem within him, or else many minor strokes are missed. Patient will come to you only when he has some problem, like the one part of the body is not working, that there is no movement in the upper limb or lower limb, or there is patient can't speak, or there is any deformity in the face. So this need to be known to assess the prognosis. And then what is the prognosis? This is the first question that patient will ask before admitting. Can this be treated? So as we know, hemorrhagic stroke have comparatively bad prognosis or poor prognosis in terms of in compared to ischemic stroke. So with the stroke, as I mentioned earlier, time lost is brain lost, because in a typical ischemic stroke, every minute the brain loses 1.9 million neurons, 14 billion synapses, and 7.5 million miles of myelinated fibers. Though these numbers are not important to be remembered, but this shows the severity of the situation, the importance of the time in stroke. So once the patient has come to casualty, he has complained with the has come with the complaints as we have mentioned earlier, like any change in the balance or facial abnormalities or hemiparesis, hemiplegia. What should we do? First thing, we have to investigate. Our first question was, is it really a stroke? So we are going to do neuroimaging, ECG, to assess where there is any associated cardiac infarction also, to rule out it, because most of the cases of stroke comes with ST elevation or non-ST segment elevation infarctions. And complete blood count to rule out erythrocytosis, whether polycythemia is the cause of stroke. Serum electrolytes, as we know, hyponatremia, is a stroke mimicker, renal function, and cardiac enzymes. As I told earlier, they come with associated cardiac ischemias most of the time, and coagulation studies to rule out any hemorrhagic tendencies. Blood sugar is very important. Why? Because hypoglycemia is a very common mimicker of stroke. It should never be missed. And if the patient comes with hyperglycemia also, this stroke can be a precipitating factor for diabetic ketoacidosis too. So this need to be controlled. And echocardiography, if you are suspecting any valve disease or any clots, which is usually present in case of atrial fibrillations. So neuroimaging, the most common neuroimaging and most fastly done and easily accessible in most of the centers is CT scan. And why do we do CT scan in acute setting? First thing, to exclude any intracranial hemorrhage, we should preclude thrombolysis or look for any early features of ischemia and exclude other intracranial pathologies that may mimic a stroke, such as tumor or contusions. So before learning the signs of stroke in CT, let's know some basics. As we know, CT images are told in terms of Hausenfeld units. It simply means that the more the Hausenfeld unit, the brighter the image. That is, it's more white, and the less it goes to more black. As we know, bone comes to around plus 1000 Hausenfeld unit, which is completely white, whereas air is minus 1000 Hausenfeld unit, which is completely black. And that important thing in our topic is gray matter and hemorrhage, where gray matter is around plus 30 to plus 40, and hemorrhage comes around plus 65 to plus 95. Main in case of ischemic stroke, the gray white matter interface is lost, and in case of hemorrhagic stroke, the clotted blood is present. So this shows the difference in image, which you are going to learn in other slides. So here what we can see, we know hemorrhagic stroke, as I told, there is complete clotting of the blood, which appears more white, whereas the Hausenfeld unit is quite less for gray matter, where there is an ischemic stroke, there is loss of gray white interface. So ischemic stroke, the logic behind the imaging, there is interruption of the blood flow. As we know, it might be because of thrombus or because of embolus, leading to deprivation of oxygen and glucose, and in turn leads, this deprivation is present only in the single vascular territory. Either it can be MC territory, PC territory, or AC territory. So there is a focus which is present in the brain, and this initiates a cascade of events at a cellular level, where there is, if circulation is not re-established in time, will lead to cell death, and mostly through liquefactive necrosis. This is important. Most other parts of the body manifest with coagulative necrosis, whereas brain shows it with liquefactive necrosis. So there are two imagings, as we know. It can, CT scan can be done and MRI scan can be done. But the main rule and dictum here in case of ischemic stroke, again I'm repeating, it is in terms of ischemic stroke, where the hypodensity on the CT indicates irreversible brain damage or indicates infarction, whereas hyperintense in case of MRI indicates infarction or irreversible brain damage. So signs of stroke can be immediate, early hyperacute, late hyperacute, acute, subacute, or chronic. But the important three signs for us are hyperdense MCS sign, which is present within 2 hours, or some books even mention 2 to 3 hours of the onset of stroke. Second being insular ribbon sign, and third one being lentiform sign. These three are direct specific signs of stroke. And there is indirect sign of stroke called as sulcal effacement sign, which indicates cerebral edema. So as I told, hyperdense MCS sign, this hyperdense MCS sign, as you can see, the yellow arrow, which is showing a white colored serpentine like lesion, which is the MCA middle cerebral artery, which is occluded by the thrombus, which is calcified. That is why it is appearing white. So this directly indicates presence of thrombus in MCA. Second one being insular ribbon sign. Here insular ribbon sign, which is shown by black arrows, there is loss of gray white interface. As we know, in brain, in the center the white matter is present, and in the periphery it is the gray matter. So this gray white interface is lost, at the lateral margins of the insula. This is called as insular ribbon sign. And the black arrow, I mean, so the white arrow which is showing lentiform nucleus. Here again the gray-white interface is lost. Why this is happening? This lentiform or insular ribbon sign indicates deep nucleus which does not have any collateral blood supply. So any infarction will lead to liquefative necrosis, accumulation of the toxic fluid, and the gray-white interface will be lost. So these are the early signs which occurs within 2 to 6 hours. Next, as I told, sulcal effacement sign. In the left image, you can see very prominent sulci and gyres. Whereas in the right image, in the left hemisphere, the sulci and gyri are not seen evidently. So why this is happening? Because of ischemia again, there is liquefative necrosis, which is leading to accumulation of the toxic fluid in the sulci. So this filling up of sulci is seen as a flat image where the sulci are not seen, and this indirectly indicates cerebral edema. This is not only just seen in stroke, it can be seen in many other conditions in case of tumor contusions where the cerebral edema is present. So this is a non-specific sign. Whereas the three other signs which we have discussed, MCA dot sign, lentiform sign, or insular ribbon sign, are specific for ischemic stroke. So this again, it's just a sequence of imaging. First, in the first 2 hours when we take the image, we see the hyperdense MCA sign. If it is present, it is not mandatory that always MCA sign to be present. Only it is seen when the clot is present in the MCA, that is middle cerebral artery. But any other infarction, it need not be seen always. So it's not sensitive, though it's specific. Next sign, loss of gray-white distinction. As I told, it's in insular cortex, that is insular ribbon sign, or lentiform nucleus, which are both of them are deep nucleuses. So gray-white matter interface is lost. As the days goes on evolving, like when you take the image on second day, third day, this hypodensity goes on increasing. And sometimes there is chances that this ischemic stroke can undergo hemorrhagic transformation. We call it as malignant stroke when the complete hemisphere is involved. And once the complete hemisphere is involved, there is high chance that it can undergo hemorrhagic transformation. That is why a patient with stroke, if he is deteriorating in the second day or third day, it is always better to repeat the CT scan to see if there is any hemorrhagic transformation. And next, MRI in ischemic stroke, though this is very specific, but it is not abundantly available in all the centers, and it is very time consuming. So in the first 4.5 hours, which is termed to be the golden period, it is not required that we always do MRI image. CT imaging is enough to diagnose it as ischemic stroke, and though even CT imaging is enough to consider for thrombolysis, but still in tertiary centers like us, we can do MRI sequence imaging and we can confirm the stroke. So here T2 wide imaging and flare imaging is done where signal intensities are seen, and as we can see on the left, T2 wide image and flare demonstrates hyper intensity in the territory of the middle cerebral artery, and the involvement of lentiform nucleus and insular cortex can also be seen here. So it's the hyper intensity which is present in MRI imaging. Next, ECG changes that we see in stroke. I put this slide just to show that we routinely do ECGs in casualty. It is of paramount importance, which shows two things. One, whether there is there any associated cardiac ischemia, because most of the times this stroke can be because of atrial fibrillation. So to diagnose atrial fibrillation, the ECG is very important. Or second thing, whether the cerebral ischemia is associated with cardiac ischemia, that is associated STEMI is present or associated end STEMI is present or not. And third thing, this can give you indirect evidence of intracranial tension, raised ICT. There can be non-specific STT changes, and there can be bradycardia present in case of raised ICT. So these subtle signs should be identified at the earliest. Next, what are the poor prognostic factors in stroke? So one thing, hyperthermia. Accompanying fever is always a poor prognostic factor. Hypotension or severe hypertension, both are poor prognostic factor. And low saturation. hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia, pontine hemorrhage. Very important. Why? Because we know posterior compartment is a very compact compartment. It's very tightly packed. So even a small infarct in posterior compartment can lead to uncal herniation. That's why posterior compartment stroke, it is always better to start the mannitol or 3% NaCl to reduce the ICT. It is always better. And low GCS score, heart failure, and severity of hemiparesis. These are other poor prognostic factors. Next, the common pitfalls in management. Though every other person can manage stroke, but the common pitfalls that is done here is aggressively managing blood pressure, which is not recommended, failure of adequate hydration, and misdiagnosis of hemorrhagic stroke as hypertensive encephalopathy. Most of the times patient will be irritable when it comes to casualty. When you measure the BP, blood pressure will be around 200, and we directly come to a conclusion it's hypertensive encephalopathy. It's not always the same. So always better to get brain imaging done and rule out stroke first. Failure to diagnose or treat hypo or hypoglycemia. As I told in previous slides, hypoglycemia is a very common stroke mimicker. So always better to do an random blood sugar level, check for blood sugar levels, and if it is hypoglycemia, it's an easy task for a physician compared to stroke. So always better to do a simple GRBS at casualty itself. This is a broad algorithm which involves all the types of stroke, where we can see first the patient comes, we have told already, B fast. We know B for balance, E for eye, face, arms, and S for speech, and T for time. B fast. Any of the manifestation among them, consider it to be a stroke. Do a brain imaging, confirm it. CT scan will confirm it by MCA dot sign or insular ribbon sign or lentiform sign. Or if it's a hemorrhagic stroke, we know hemorrhagic stroke can also be seen in CT scan at the earliest. So next to be done is ABCs. Those are airway, breathing, and circulation. If the patient comes with low GCS less than 8, better to intubate him. Check for blood pressure. If it is hypertensive or hypotensive, manage it accordingly. And glucose level, hypo or hyper. We have discussed it in a very depth. Next, we have obtained the brain imaging. Ischemic, hemorrhagic, we have classified it. Very less common hemorrhagic stroke, first we'll see. Consider BP lowering, then establish the cause. Why was this hemorrhage occurred? Whether was it because of aneurysm, that is subarachnoid hemorrhage, or was it hypertensive ICH or other causes? So if it is aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, clipping or coiling, that can be done, endovascular clipping or coiling. Or if it is hypertensive ICH, surgery can be considered, decompression surgeries, and others you can treat accordingly. Now, if imaging is done and if this is a ischemic stroke, which is 85% of the time, or if it is a transient ischemic attack, we'll discuss in next slide. Coming to only ischemic stroke, if it is a ischemic stroke and if it's been established, consider thrombolysis or endovascular thrombectomy based on the center that you have been. Establish the cause. Why was this ischemic stroke occurred? Was it an embolic phenomenon? Was it a thrombotic phenomenon? So if it is an embolic phenomenon, is it a cardioembolic or is it a arterio-arterial embolus? If it is a cardioembolic, we know ECG will show us atrial fibrillation most of the times. Treat atrial fibrillation. How? We'll do CHA2DS2 score. We'll start them on anticoagulants like warfarin. Now usually dabigatran can be used, newer anticoagulants. Or if it is a carotid embolus, that is arterio-arterial embolus, then consider carotid endarterectomy or stenting. Or if it is any other cause like any hypercoagulable state, hemorrhagic diastasis, treat accordingly. These are the rare entities. Once we are treated, most of the time the patient will be hospitalized for more than 5 to 7 days. He will be bedridden for most of the days. So the complication that can occur is deep vein thrombosis. Always look for DVT, signs of DVT. So we can give DVT prophylaxis in such cases. And if the speech is involved, speech therapy can be initiated at the earliest. and secondary prevention based on the diseases which are present. And based on all this, we can plan discharge later on. So as I told, TIA we know it is less than 1 hour with normal brain imaging. The recovery occurs completely after 1 hour. Though previous definition used to tell 24 hours, but now we know infarction sets in within 1 hour. So 1 hour is considered now, and brain imagings are absolutely normal. So is it a good news for us? No, this is an alarming sign. The patient with TIA can go to complete full-fledged stroke in next 2 weeks, or he can even undergo an myocardial infarction in the coming weeks. So this TIA is an alarming sign for us. How to know whether this TIA to be took seriously or can be ignored? So for this, there is a scoring called ABCD2 score, where A stands for age. If age is more than 60 years, we give them 1 point. If blood pressure is more than 140/80, we give them 1 point. Clinical features, if there is unilateral weakness, it is 2 points. And if there is only speech impairment without weakness, it is just 1 point again. Duration of surgery, if it was for more than 60 minutes or 10 to 59 minutes, 2 point or 1 point. And diabetes, if it is present, again 1 point. So after adding all these points, now score comes down to either if it is 0 to 3, it is a low risk. 2-day risk of stroke is very low, and recurrence within 90 days is just 1%. If it is 4 to 5, it is moderate risk, and 4.1% is a recurrence chances for next 90 days. And 6 to 7 is at high risk. So this moderate and high risk are the one who are very ideal to be started on anticoagulants. Now, most of the times, patients with TIA are aged more than 60 years, and they usually have been started with anticoagulants previously for some other issues, maybe cardiac issues. Now, what to do? We can add double anticoagulant. If only aspirin is started, start them with aspirin with clopidogrel. What if they're started on both aspirin and clopidogrel? Now we can consider anticoagulants like warfarin and dabigatran. So this is the point where we are preventing the stroke. Now, this ABCD2 score, the sensitivity is increased by adding an I, that is imaging. So it is called as ABCD2I score. Okay. Now, ABCD2 score is in total 7 points. But if image, MRI is showing acute infarction on diffusion weight image, 3 points are given. Or it is same even if CT shows acute or old infarction. So this is of paramount importance to consider ABCD2 score in any patient who complains of weakness which was transient and he has recovered completely, though it is an alarming sign and of very importance in case of management to be started on either single antiplatelet, dual antiplatelet, or on add-on anticoagulant. Now, patient has come with stroke. More commonly, I'll deal with ischemic stroke because ischemic stroke is the main medical topic, and hemorrhagic is usually and surgical management. So, medical management, first thing, any patient comes to casualty, it's supportive. Airway to be maintained, circulation, that is blood pressure, temperature, again, very important, and blood glucose. Either it can be hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia. Cardiac assessment, never to be forgot, because it can be atrial fibrillation, underlying atrial fibrillation that is precipitating this stroke. Then thrombolytics, intravenous or intraarterial, which we are going to discuss, antiplatelet drugs, anticoagulant drugs, and neuroprotective drugs. So coming to temperature, fever or hyperthermia indicates worst or poor outcome. For every 1 degree Celsius in temperature, there is rise in temperature, risk of poor outcome doubles. And greatest effect is seen in first 24 hours. Therefore, always treat aggressively the hyperthermia using antipyretics. It need not be ignored. It should be treated aggressively. Then blood pressure. Again, the point of blood pressure is very controversial. Some people believing in reducing the BP up to 180 as earliest as possible, but most of the literature tells blood pressure to be treated only if systolic BP is more than 220 or diastolic BP is in between 120 to 140, and treatment goal should be just reduction of 10 to 15% of blood pressure, because sudden or drastic reduction of blood pressure will hamper cerebral autoregulation. And once the cerebral autoregulation is hampered, we have learned in pathogenesis that will increase the area of infarction. And in turn, it is because of reduction of the blood supply. So this blood pressure should be brought down just 10%, 15%. I am telling only in case of ischemic stroke. The guidelines changes when we come in terms of hemorrhagic stroke. So ischemic stroke, 10 to 15% reduction in 24 hours. And usual treatment of choice, Labetalol 10 to 20 mg IV or 1 to 2 minutes can be given. And double dose can be doubled every 10 minutes till the desired blood pressure is obtained. Or nicardipine infusion can be started, which is usually started 5 mg per hour, titrated up by first initially we start with 0.25 mg per hour, and every 5 to 15 minutes interval we check the blood pressure and we titrate it up to 5 mg per hour. Maximum you can go up to 25 mg per hour, which is rarely required. Then thrombolysis. The whole point of studying this topic is two things. One, penumbra. Second, time. Time is of paramount importance to save the penumbra. And how it is saved? By thrombolysis. As early the patient comes to us, it's the better. The prognosis is good. So, if the patient lands up to us within 4.5 hours of onset of symptom, now there is a question here. Many of the time, patient tells he noticed weakness when he got up from the bed. So, which time to be considered now? Here, the time to be considered is when the patient went to sleep. So, for example, if patient has gone to bed at around 10 o'clock and he has noticed the weakness when he got up in the morning 6 o'clock, this is not the golden period now because onset of time was 10 o'clock in the night. So, this is a clinical dilemma which commonly occurs. So, this to be always taken onset of symptom when first noticed, like when patient was awake and he got a sensation of paresthesia in the both upper and lower limb of right side, say, and then which turned out to be weakness where he can't lift his upper limb or can't move his lower limb. So that onset of time is considered, and when he comes to hospital within 4.5 hours, you can consider him for thrombolysis. But yeah, there are certain indications for this. First thing, when patient comes to us, do a CT, non-contrast CT, rule out bleed, because in hemorrhage, if you thrombolyze, it will worsen the scenario. It will not benefit the patient. It should be ischemic stroke to thrombolyze. So do a CT, look for MCA dot sign if present, or look for any white gray matter interface alteration, like in case of insular ribbon sign, or in case of lentiform sign, or look for indirect evidence like sulcal effacement sign, which indicates cerebral edema. And next, blood pressure. If it is more than 180/100, never consider for thrombolysis. Because if BP is more than 180/100 and if you thrombolyze, there are high chances that vessel can rupture and lead to hemorrhage. You're in turn not helping the patient. It is the worsening of the situation. So BP should be less than 180/100. And make sure you take the history properly that patient has no bleeding tendency. Okay. Now, once everything is set and done, we are considering for thrombolysis what to be used. Three things can be used. One, recombinant tissue plasminogen activator can be used. Altiplase, which is very commonly used and which has got very good prognosis, or streptokinase. And you should be as quick as possible. Door to needle time should be less than 1 hour. And what is the dose that we give? It is 0.9 mg per kg, wherein first 10% of the dose is given in first 10 minutes and rest 90% of the dose is given in next 60 minutes. This is the dose of Altiplase which you commonly use. And every benefit comes with its own risk. The risk of thrombolysis is that it can turn an ischemic stroke into intracranial hemorrhage. So it has got its own risk. So it's up to the physician to consider for thrombolysis. But it is always better to consider because we are saving the salvageable part of penumbra and we are reducing the morbidity of the patient. Say the patient will have to stay paralyzed whole of his life without the movement of his upper limb and lower limb, and you're saving it and you're bringing back the movement. It's like just giving him a new life. Okay. And next, newer updates here are endovascular treatments of stroke. Though these are available in very less settings in case of India, but yeah, this is a better treatment compared to thrombolysis, where same as we do cardiac angiography, we do cerebral angiogram. But before this, we do CT angiogram to confirm the clot, where the clot is present, and we enter through the arterial access, go to the point of thrombus, and insert a stent, same as we do in case of cardiac angioplasty. But yeah, here the risks are more because we are entering the cerebral circulation where a damage can lead to a new infarction. A new problem can be created while going there. And other modalities, as we know, commonly what we use, aspirin we use. In addition, you can give clopidogrel. Mannitol can be used if sulcal effacement signs is present, or it should be used in case of posterior circulation stroke. As I told, posterior circulation, posterior compartment is a very compact compartment. There is high chance of cerebral edema, high chance of uncal herniation. Always consider mannitol in the initial days. Then neuroprotective agents like paracetamol, silicone, these are class 3 drugs which have no proven benefits, but yeah, it's better to have at least 0.5% of benefit in case of brain. And treating of complication like prophylaxis of DVT and speech therapy early initiation, those other conservative modalities can be initiated as early as possible. So this ends up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So we have some questions here. First is, when would you prescribe compressive stockings?
Compressive stockings are not prescribed initially, but when the hospitalization duration increases more than 7 days, it is always better to prescribe.
Okay.
Or if you see any signs of DVT.
And DVD. Sir, as you said, we use thrombolysis in case of ischemic stroke, and it's contraindicated if there is a hemorrhage in the brain. So how will you treat a hemorrhagic stroke then?
Hemorrhagic stroke, most of the time, if it is a small hemorrhagic stroke, it's a conservative management. Patient comes with seizure, treat with antiepileptics, give mannitol to reduce the intracranial tension. And if it is a malignant hemorrhagic stroke, where huge part of the brain is involved, and when there is the shifting of the central line, where there is shift of the hemisphere, then we can do decompressive surgeries. Though nothing is curable, it's just treating the complication, giving a life to the patient. That's it.
And so as you said, in brain there will be a liquefactive necrosis. So what is the cause for it? That cause?
Here, liquefactive necrosis because of derangement of the sodium potassium ATPase pump, which is leading to electrolyte imbalance and accumulation of the toxic fluid.
Okay. And so what is lacunar stroke?
Lacunar stroke are nothing but these are minute stroke occurring in the lacunar vessels. These are the penetrating vessels in the brain which are around 30 to 300 micrometer, and these strokes range from only 30 millimeter to 3 centimeter in diameter. And this usually occurs in setting of hyalinosis of the artery, and second most common cause being hypertension.
And so suppose the patient came to you and with all symptoms of stroke, but he is not affordable for MRI, and the CT scan shows there is no bleeding, no hemorrhage is there. So how will you manage further?
As we told, definitely by NHS's scoring, we can consider him for thrombolysis, but it should be arterial stroke. If it is an arterial stroke and CT imaging is showing either MC Dodson or any other sign, or there is no hemorrhagic manifestation, but patient has some weakness or some speech abnormalities, and those are fitting into the signs and symptoms of stroke, we can consider him for thrombolysis or endovascular treatment if the setting provides it.
And so as you told, there's a MRI is more preferred than CT. So if we do diffuse weighted MRI, and if it, how will you tell it is acute or chronic?
In DW1 MRI, usually we have to do associate with ADC sequence. If DW1 shows hypointense and ADC sequence shows hyperintense, that indicates chronic infarct, and the vice versa being the same for the acute infarct.
Okay. And suppose in higher settings we use endovascular interventions. So we use thrombolysis in that, or we don't use only directly or before or after we use?
There are again two modalities in endovascular treatment. One, direct stenting can be done, or this treatment which is used successfully in case of pulmonary thromboembolism, where the catheter is inserted to the site of thrombus and thrombolytic agent like urokinase are injected. But it comes with its own drawbacks. The excessive injection of thrombolysis can lead to rupture of arteries, can lead to hemorrhage. But this is used successfully in case of pulmonary thromboembolism.
So means thrombolysis we don't use only in that case.
Both can be used, thrombolytics and stenting.
We can
Stenting
use.
is preferred.
Simultaneously we can use simultaneously.
Simultaneously we can do, yeah.
Okay, that's all. So any questions if anyone has, I will end up. Thank you, sir, for joining.
Thank you.